Hey there, Jake Dempsey, CEO and co-founder of Project Broadcast. Today we're going to talk about JotForms and how you would use those with Project Broadcast app flows. Now, we've already done a video on how to leverage app flows using Google Forms. So in this video, I'm going to walk through the JotForm use case. Now, I will say before we begin, the JotForm use case is a little more complicated than the Google Form approach. And that's primarily because when you fill out and use Google Forms, you can have it connect to a Google Sheet, and the data is much more readily available. When using a JotForm, you have to work with the underlying data a bit more directly than you do with a Google Sheet, which already has the data broken out for you. So I'm going to share my screen in just a moment, and we'll take a look at my JotForm that I've got created, and then we'll also look at an existing app flow that I've created, and I'm going to step through each of the steps in my JotForm example that'll hopefully kickstart your integration of using JotForms with Project Broadcast app flows. So let's pop over to Project Broadcast, and we will jump in and take a look at both the app flow that I've created and the JotForm. Now, my JotForm is a pretty basic, subscribe form. I'm asking for first name, last name, phone number, email address, and I just had a little question here on what are they interested in: unicorns, zebras, or dragons. The reason I put this example here of giving them kind of a drop down to select is a real common question I get is, hey, I want to provide a form to my customers, but I'd like Project Broadcast to do something different based on how they answer the question. And that's a really popular use case. So I just want to show an example of how that would work using app flows. So this is our form. And then, of course, I can come to publish and get the link to the form. We'll test this form out in just a moment so that you can see it actually working. But let me now go over to Project Broadcast, and we're going to take a look at my JotForm app flow. Now, you probably already know how to create an app flow and get into the designer. So I'm just going to show you an existing test case that I've built, and we're going to walk through each step so I can show you kind of what you would do when building this flow. I'm going to stop my flow so that we can actually click on the items and see the content for each of them. So I pulled over the JotForm connector that lives in the left-hand side of the screen, and then I connected it to my JotForm account. And then I get to tell it what form do I want it to monitor. And my form, if you recall over here, is just called Subscribe to My Awesomeness. That's the name of my form. So once I've connected JotForm, with the JotForm connector, you have to have this one additional step that's going to save you so much time as you work with JotForm. Whenever you get data from JotForm, and I'll get just a little technical, it comes through basically like a webhook, and that webhook is going to have a bunch of just raw data in it. It's not structured in any way. So we have to kind of parse that data so that it's in a usable format for us later on in our connector. I like to do that one time. I want to do that heavy lifting one time and create a variable. So I use the variables utility, which is, I think it is actually under controls. I'm just going to drag a control over here. And you'll see this set variable. So that's the item you want to use to get this guy. And then you're going to tell it, well, what do you want the value of the variable to be? And if I click this plus here, I get basically a bunch of fields that are coming from the JotForm submission. But none of these fields are giving me the actual data that was submitted from the form. That lives in the raw request. So I pull out the raw request, and then it'll be blue. And then I click the blue raw request because I want to do something to that raw request. And what I want to do is parse it. I'm going to delete this so you can see how you would do that. You would look at the modifiers, and under the modifiers, there's one called parse. Convert a JSON string to an object or list. Just trust me on this. This is the step you want to do first. So set variable is going to parse the raw request, and it's going to store it in a field called form data. And that's so that later I can just leverage that variable instead of working with kind of the ugly data that I get from JotForm out of the gate. In my next step, I'm going to want to find and update an existing contact in Project Broadcast, or I want it to create a new contact in Project Broadcast. And the first thing we have to provide that step is, what is the phone number, email, or contact ID that we're going to use to find the contact? Well, we don't have a contact ID, obviously, because we just had someone randomly, submit this form on our website. So we're either going to use the phone number or email. I typically use the phone number just because in Project Broadcast, the phone number is the unique field for every contact. And if they're in Project Broadcast, they have to have a phone number, where email is a optional field. So it's possible that you don't have the email address on your existing contact. So what you want to use is something called XPath. And XPath is a way for you to kind of parse the data. Or sorry, it's JSON path. It's XPath if it's XML. It's JSON path if it's JSON data. But you need to be able to find your information in the raw data from JotForm. And for my form, this was the path. JQ, which was my question 5, phone number .full. Now you might be asking, how do I get that? And I'm going to pause for a second and show you what my process is for kind of working through this, okay? So the first step, right, is we get a form submitted, and then we set our variable. I'm going to actually start this flow, because let's pretend you haven't done anything below set variable yet. I'm going to start this flow, because when I built this test case, I was testing the whole time. Every time I would make a modification, I would want to go test that modification. So I've just turned the app flow on. We can see the little dots moving, and we can see the stop flow button. I'm going to open the logs here to watch when the form gets submitted, and I'm going to clear them. I'm going to go to my form, and I'm going to actually go submit that form, because I want to see that data come through the app flow engine and kind of look at what it's doing. And let's just say we're interested in zebras. I'm going to submit that form. I'm going to go back over to the AppFlow engine, and we can see that it's already detected that new form submission. What I really want to look at is the set variable, because that's the step I'm assuming you're currently at. And if we open that, now in that set variable step, I can see that my variable was created. And it gives me a little information in here in terms of what it created, what type of variable, and what it set the value to. So I can see that it added a variable. The type of the variable is a text. The name of the variable that I called it was form data. The text, meaning this is what it actually set the variable to, is this blob of information, which is what came to us from JotForm. I'm going to actually put that in my clipboard, because I'm going to use it in just a second in the rest of my workflow. So I'm going to close this. I'm going to go to that update create contact step and show you in the contact field when I had to find the phone number, and I got to get the phone number from that form data, right? Because they just submitted the form on JotForm. So I'm going to click the plus here. I'm going to leverage that form data variable that we set, but that form data variable's just got a bunch of stuff in it. And we need to parse out of that bunch of stuff the phone number. So I'm going to click the blue form data because I want to act on that data. I want to use a feature called JSON path, because the data that we got back is called JSON data. And if you're familiar with Zapier, you know what JSON data is. I'm going to paste that value that I put in the variable in this test area, because I want to test whatever I write here against this sample to make sure that the output that I get is the phone number. And if we scroll here, we should be able to find that phone number. There it is. And we can see that it's in a field called Q5 phone number. Now, again, for your JotForm, your phone number may be question 2, question 3, question 37. That's why you want to use this raw data to find out where that phone number is. And we can see that it's not just in the field phone number, it's in a subfield of phone number called full. So I have to do Q5 phone number dot full. And if I run a test, I should get that phone number. And I did. So I know that I've got the right JSON path from this raw data that I got from JotForm. So I'm going to update that. Let's do it again for like first name so you can kind of get a rhythm of how this works. So I'm going to add my form data here. It's still going to be, it's still going to be in the blue state because that's just the raw data. Well, I want to work on that data. So I'm going to click it. I'm going to do JSON path. I've still got that example output here in my clipboard. I'm just going to paste it. Oh, I didn't. I lost it. So let me go grab it from this guy. There we go. And let's put it in that first name example as well. So there's our example response. I want to add a modifier of JSON path. And I want to look for the first name in here. So somewhere in here is the name. And we can see in the name, which is my question 3, in the name is a field called first. Well, that means I want to use Q3 underscore name dot first. And if I run the test, we'll see that I get the output of J, which is what I filled out the form. Now, if I put something wrong in here and try to test, I'm not going to get output because it's going to say, hey, that selection doesn't exist in the sample data you're giving me to test that modifier. So let me go back to first and test it. I get the J back, so I know that that's right. And if I look at these other fields I'm looking for, like last name, you can see I'm using q3.name.last. And if I paste that example in here and test it, I get that output of D because I put D as the value in the form. So that's working. Okay, great. Well, email address, where was that? It looks like it's in a field called just Q4 email in my form. So I should be able to, again, paste that example, look for the email, and there I see it. Q4 email is the value of my email, and there's no subfield. So it is just Q4 email. And if I test it, I should get the email back, and I did. So I know that these are now configured properly. So that's going to allow me, using the initial variable, to set the raw request to a field called form data, so that later I can just work with that form data variable and access the values through JSON path. Now, again, I think it's done this way because JotForm is so flexible in terms of where you may put the question first name. It may be, again, your question 1 or question 50, and the field is dynamic, meaning it could be anything, a first name, it's whatever you called it, right? So all of that data comes to Project Broadcast in just a big blob of data. And then you have to use JSON path to extract the fields that you want to extract from that form data variable that you created. So I want to show you something else while I'm showing you this example. I've pulled over another control. So again, the control here in the left-hand connector area, I pulled another control over here that's called a switch. So when you pull a control over, I'll just kind of show you. When you pull a control over, in the actions or the different actions that you've got available to you when using different controls, I'm using the switch example. You can see it right here. Now, I've already added it, so I'm just going to kind of review what it does. A switch statement in app flows is basically the ability for you to make a decision on something in your app flow that has up to 5 different outputs with an else statement, meaning if it doesn't meet one of these 5 conditions, it would fall through to the else statement. And if we look at the way I've built this particular switch statement, is I'm using form data, but I'm using the question 6. And if I paste that sample payload back into this test and test that Q6, what are you interested in, I get back in my sample zebras. So I know that's referring to my question in my form down here. What are you interested in? Now, what's cool about that is I've got a switch for if that value is unicorns, if that value is zebras, if that value is dragons. So I've got 3 very specific outputs of dragons for number 3, zebras for number 2, and unicorns for number 1. Now, with that, you can do a lot of things, right? Maybe you've got different campaigns in Project Broadcast and you want to add people who care about dragons to a dragon campaign and someone who cares about unicorns, a unicorn campaign. And obviously, this is a contrived example, but it's just to show you the concept. Now, what I've done just in this example is I'm sending a message that's different for each option that they may select. So if someone picked unicorns, which I think was my first switch statement, I have to choose the contact ID. Let me delete that and show you, where that's coming from. Well, when I did the update create contact step, if I scroll, I'll see there's that update create contact step, and I want to use the contact ID from that step. That is the contact I need to send a message to. And when I send a message, I can either just type a message directly in AppFlows, or if I prefer, I could also use a message template that already exists in Project Broadcast. Just for simplicity, I'm using text here to show you kind of the example. So if someone were to select unicorns on my form, they're going to get, hi, you selected unicorns. If they selected zebras, they're going to get, oh, you like zebras, huh? And if they select dragons, it's going to send them the message, dragons, be careful, don't get burned. Now, again, this is a very kind of oversimplified example, but it's to show you that you can really be creative in what happens once you get that JotForm in terms of what do you want to do with the data. You could just update the contact, and on my version, I am updating the contact with the first name, last name, email address. And if I wanted to, I could even add notes here like filled out interest form on, and then I'm going to add a timestamp maybe. Like maybe I want to put a timestamp, to know when they filled out the form. That'll add a note to the contact every time this gets filled out. Or maybe I want to tag the contact based on what they are interested in. So I'm going to use the form data again, and I'm just going to search for it here to get to it quickly. I'm going to use the form data. I'm going to click on the blue form data because I have to, interact with that form data. Paste my example that I've still got in my clipboard here, and I'm going to look for where that item was that has the zebra's answer in it that was submitted. And it looks like it's in this Q6 what are. So I'm going to add a modifier of JSON path, and I'm going to use Q6 underscore what are. Let me double check that it was what are. I spell that correctly. What are, yes. So if I test that, I should get zebras back, and I did. Now, what that means is that anytime anyone submits my form, it's going to update the contact info. It's going to also tag them with either unicorns, zebras, what was the other option? Unicorns, zebras, or dragons. And then it's going to send them a message depending on what they selected. So I'm going to just start this flow because we've made some changes to it. Now, once the flow gets going, I'm going to open my logs here because I want to actually submit this. I'm going to clear the logs. I'm going to go submit this form again. So we're going to say, Jake, put in a phone number, put in an email address, and let's select dragons. I'm going to submit it. I'm going to go back to Project Broadcast, and it's already detected the form submission. And I'm going to just step through, what's occurring. So we can see that the variable was set. It updated the contact. So I'm going to look at, the contact update here by clicking on the log item. And I can see that this is the information that it's updating on the contact. It's setting the phone number. It's setting the email, the first name, the last name. Let's see what else did it store in here. Tags should be in here. There it is. There's tags. And you can see that it has dragons now. And we'll go look at the contact directly, but I want to show you what this looks like in the logs. And then ultimately it got down to deciding what message to send me. And I can see that it sent me a message. And it sent me the dragons, be careful, don't get burned. Well, let's go actually look for the contact and make sure that's actually what happened. So if we pull up that contact, we should see that all my information is updated. We do. We can also see that they were tagged dragons. We also added a note, if you recall, and it posted that it filled out the interest form. Now, this value is not a great value, which means we should probably modify the app flow to do a format on that, or use a different kind of concept if we want to put the date time in here. I love using notes in app flows because you can keep appending to notes on a contact when something's occurred in the app flow that you think is important, which gives you just a history of what's gone on with that contact. And then I'm going to open the chat with that contact, and we should see that they sent me, and it did, dragons, be careful, don't get burned. Now let's pop back over to the app flows here. We'll take one last look at that app flow, just one last review to go over. We're going to step through it just as an overview now. A form is submitted from JotForm. We set a variable to form data, which represents just that raw data that came back from JotForm, because we know we got to interact with that data in our app flow. We update and create the contact. Now, if the contact didn't exist, the reason we use update create contact is because if it could not find the contact with that phone number, it would create a new contact for us. And that's very helpful because if your form's on your website or on social media or wherever and someone fills it out, you want that contact to be in Project Broadcast. And then we also did a bunch of other things in that contact, right? We updated the first name, the last name, the email, added a note, tagged them in cool ways. And then we said, okay, I want to do something in Project Broadcast that's based on how they answer the what are you interested in. Now, in my example, I'm just switching on, that the three options I gave them of unicorns, dragons, and whatever the third one was, I don't remember. But, there's a message that's separate for each of them. Now, this is where you can kind of let your imagination run wild and do tons of things in Project Broadcast, right? You could put them in different campaigns based on how they answered, or you could do nothing. You could just store that as a custom field. Or maybe you just want to tag them so that later you want to send a message to all the people who selected dragons on your interest form. It's really up to you kind of to decide what's the business use case. And even then, you may want to integrate with even other third-party tools. Like maybe you're a big Trello user and you say, hey, I actually want to create a Trello item in my Trello board anytime someone fills out that survey as a task for me to go complete. Or maybe you want it to send you a text message that such and such just filled out your form so that you've got a text message on your own phone that your form was just filled out. So as you can tell, there's a number of things that you can do. The only real limitation in what you can do is your imagination. I'm excited for what you're going to go do with app flows and Project Broadcast now that you know how to integrate JotForms. And if you got a really cool use case, feel free to post about it in our Project Broadcast Facebook group. Would love to see how you're leveraging app flows to grow your business.